Hi folks, you're with Tab today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about primarily barter, that is the exchange of conducting, if you like, a commercial exchange, but without use of money. So, you give your neighbour the carrots out of your vegetable garden, and the neighbour gives you 2 dozen eggs from the hens he's got in the backyard. So no money changes hands there. There's no independent value exchange. Now, when money changes hands, the opportunity for taxation is there. You've got to make the money, and the money gets taxed, and so on. But in a barter exchange, there is no money exchange, and therefore no tax is paid. Now, with the universal basic income almost certain to be a reality in the not too distant future, and with physical money disappearing and everything being e-money, and together with the rising cost of living, the reduced purchasing power of the paycheck, and the inevitable use of the essentials of life as a way of taxing citizens, so access to water and energy and housing and that sort of thing will be astronomically expensive and will be a de facto tax. So, but the need of the state to pull in revenue, if anything, to pay for the masses of spies and Secret Service agents and other forms of goons that are going to have to run around and intimidate a citizenry that won't be happy about the globalist project as it continues on. And that's, by the way, what nobbling Trump's all about. Trump's really the only threat out there to the globalist project, and they know it, and they're not prepared to accept any opposition. No opposition will be accepted, and they are prepared to accept any amount of collateral damage. They don't care how it is. Tear up the Constitution, tear up the rule of law, tear up due legal process. It doesn't matter. They're not prepared to accept any opposition, and they will accept and will actively pursue any amount of collateral damage as they go chasing after this globalist project. And the biggest threat is Trump. So they'll do anything to get him, anything, and they're going through it right now. But coming back to the barter thing, how do you tax barter? Now, in the Soviet Union, when they wanted tax, they just employed spies, and spies were everywhere watching what people did. So if someone tried to do a barter deal, I'll give you vodka if you give me this or that, that sort of thing, then they would they'd be informed on, and they'd get a visit from the secret police. There are other forms of barter as well in the Soviet Union or any oppressive society, but they would somebody would say, well, I'll give you half of my my sugar ration if you give me half of your meat ration, or those sorts of things would go on, and private arrangements between individuals. But it meant that the government had less control over the distribution of goods and services, and of course less control over taxation, and it screwed up their central planning mechanisms, as they saw it, at least. So they needed to then employ millions upon millions of spies and informants and so on, so they could stop that. Now, there was a huge black market anyway, and the government seemed to turn a blind eye to that, to some extent at least. And I think the same will happen in the West. I mean, we don't sort of have it to anywhere near the same extent. And I've travelled all over the world in some very impoverished or even middle economies, and the under the table black market and the corruption is just chronic all over the place, and it creates the most terrible distortions in terms of value and the value of a transaction, and why people pursue a certain course of action in commerce. And once you get bribery and corruption affecting things, then the true value and the most efficient allocation of the nation's resources is hopelessly compromised. And we're seeing that all over the West today, and the globalists are actively encouraging that. So coming back to this sort of bartering, I want to talk about a bit more. Just before the Industrial Revolution, and in the many hundreds and thousands of years leading up to that, barter, and before money came the independent standard of value, if you like. Barter was the way things were done, particularly in agrarian or agricultural societies, where again, you can have my turnips and I'll give you my eggs, and that sort of thing. And so and even the landowning aristocracy would be trading, say, a worker's labour in return for accommodation, or they would spend 2 days a week growing food for tending the farm owned by the aristocrat, and 3-4 days or whatever doing their own block of land or plot of land for growing vegetables, and maybe having a cow on and a couple of goats, that sort of thing. So this was very common. Now, once money came in and people started moving, for example, in England, just as the Industrial Revolution was just beginning to kick off, when people started moving from the farms into the cities, then you had what looked like this incredible jump in the size of the economy, and it did grow. It was industrializing, of course, but really the big jump was not that the economy grew that quickly. But rather that people who had been living by barter were suddenly living by earning money in a factory or that sort of thing, and being paid a wage. So they were pretty much invisible to the economy as if they existed on barter. But as soon as money was there, then there was taxation and an independent means to ascertain value and thus overall economic mass. So that's one of the things there. We can also look at the Great Depression as an example. In the United States, there was something like 20+% of the population were really day labourers in the 1920s. When the economy was booming, some of these guys did pretty good. When the Great Depression started, they were the hardest hit, because the demand for those sort of day labourers went, certainly as a wage, but the idea that the economy went crashing as far as it did is deceptive, because a lot of those, not all, but a lot of those people went out into the country and they worked as farmhands, but for food only. So they'd sleep in the loft of the farm, and in the hay loft, and they'd do jobs around the farm, help with bringing in the harvest or planting the crops or mending fences and all that sort of stuff. But they didn't get paid. They just got, as I say, they got a place to sleep in the hayloft and some food. So they disappeared from the economy as wage earners, and just sort of went into the miasma of bartering, a barter existence. So the economy didn't shrink as much as it appears on paper. These people were still working and doing stuff. Well, not all of them, but many of them. They were just being rewarded a different way, and I think that's where we're heading now. And I see it even around just people that we know, people that aren't necessarily poor, but they're already looking at transactions with other people. Well, I'll do this for you if you do that for me, but no money changes hands. And I can already see that. Now, a few years ago, you wouldn't see that. I never saw it. It maybe would happen in the desperately poor suburbs and that sort of thing, but it didn't really happen outside of that. But the cost of living is such, and the purchasing power of the paycheck is declining to a point where people are looking that they can't take on more debt. So the only other place they've got to go is exchanging what skills they have, or their time in some cases, in exchange for something else. So and just an example, we some people went away on an international holiday. We looked after their pets while they were away, and when they came back, they had access to some produce and so on. So they said, "Hey, would you like?" So we didn't ask for it, and we were probably a little surprised, but they made it plain that we should get something for helping them out. I mean, they paid for the the pet food while they're away. It's not like we were out of pocket or something, but we put in our time, I suppose, but just I'm seeing those things more and more now. If you're the Internal Revenue Service and the economy technically is shrinking, but all this barter is taking place, how do you tax it? How do you get a value from it? Do you find people who do it? Do you demand a piece of the action? How do you know about things taking place? So again, it's going to need an army of spies and informants and so on, and I think that's where it's going to go. And you'll see things with, say, use of things like energy and water, or anything at all that the government, globalist controlled governments, want to restrict Western citizens from having access to, or charging them, absolute enormous sums of money for it. Then they're going to want to know if there's any illicit transactions going on, or transactions occurring that's outside of their control or observation, and they're going to need armies of informants to do that. So I think that's where we're heading. And you already see it now. I mean, in England at the moment, they're having water restrictions. I think on I think it's watering the garden or something like that, watering the lawns, whatever. And people are invited, if not being exhorted by the government, to inform on their neighbours. And I think that'll be standard practice, and it'll be beyond sort of rewards for virtue. Feeling virtuous. I informed on my neighbour, and I never did like that guy, and that sort of thing. It'll be beyond that. Well, you'll get an extra 2 units of energy usage for for you this month, and people will be rewarded with hard to get or expensive goods and services, and the government will put it out to people. Now, this is very much how the Soviet Union was. If you were a good ideological fanatic, communist fanatic, you would have access to better apartments and better shops and so on. So rewards came for your ideological fanaticism, not because you were a good model citizen or something like that. So anyway, that's where I think things are going. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.